Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The discourses that are developed to articulate these beliefs are necessarily based on a specific interpretation of the nusus. Last time we looked at the two meaning of nas, and we looked at the four different reasons why there is a gap between the text and its interpretation. So the text as text or nas has two meaning, two senses. A general sense in which anything from the Shari, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the messenger is text. But in the terminology of the Usulis, text had a particular meaning as well. Text, or particular, or more correctly, or more accurately, specific meaning. And with this specific meaning, not all texts are texts in this sense. Not all texts are nas. Nas is only the text which is wazihud dalala and which accepts only one meaning. And we give an example of Qul huwallahu ahad. Ahad mean one in Arabic. There's no other meaning. It can't mean two or three. So it's clear meaning and also only one meaning. But only these sort of texts leads to clear-cut propositions on which there cannot be any difference. And they form the core of Islamic belief and Islamic practice. But they're not too many. Most of the nusus, even those which are clear-cut like wadihud dalala, they have more than one possible meaning in the Arabic language. And when there is more than one possible meaning, then there can be variety of possible interpretations, which are all legitimate in the sense that they are based on the correct methodology. So people who accept the same text, accept the same belief, can have more than one interpretation of the same text. But generally, these sort of things relate not to the core of the Iman or Aqidah, neither to the core of the practice. They relate to the detail or matters which are based on ijtihad. And in those cases, more than one interpretations are not only possible but necessary, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given people different levels of understanding and different levels of interpretation. Based on that understanding, Allah has given people different level of rationality, the power of understanding and rationality. And that can't be something accidental. It must be something which is God's plan, in the sense that He wants us to think about things. And disagreement about those things which accept a disagreement, in that sense, is generally a blessing, because most of the time, if you look at as long as that difference remains within its limit, different people who are talking about two different interpretations, they are more than not emphasizing different aspects of the same belief system, or the same reality, or the same purpose. So, for example, just to give you an example, on the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sifat. Wa ta'ala. There are two imperatives which are accepted by everybody, all Muslims, scholars, I mean. Two imperatives. One is to avoid what can be tashbih, and tashbih means likening Allah or understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on similitude to His creation. Even though we don't have any other way to understand and relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the imperative there is, what we want is tanzih, that is, avoid all sort of anthropomorphism, but also sorts of other ways in which people have understood Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on His similitude with His creation, and which is basically the foundation stone of paganism and pantheism and all those, and the theories of hulul and ittihad and all those things. So that's the imperative of tanzih. You don't want to understand God based on tashbih. Laysa kamithlihi shay, as Quran says. Nothing resembles Him, or nothing can even come close to being a misl, or coming close to his reality. So that's avoiding tashbih, and that's the imperative of tanzih. So one of the things is you reject everything which compare Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to his creation. So you say that he is unlike anything which exists, unlike anything which comes to our mind, which we can think of. Is beyond our imagination, beyond our grasp and all that. So that's tanzih. But there's another imperative which is as important. So there are two horns to this verse. Which is to avoid ta'til. Because even in ancient philosophies, people realize that God is unlike anything which we come across or which we can think of. So they try to create a gulf between the conception of God and anything else they knew. But they went to such an extreme that they even denied that God exists. We can say God exists because that will... Not that they denied God, but they said that you can't say God exists, God is a thing, or even at most what you can say is God is nothing, they said. Because other things exist. So if God is unlike anything that we encounter, then we must deny that God exists. So that's going to another extreme. So because Islamic teaching or the Quran teaches us that we should avoid we should practice tanzih and we should avoid any tashbih, but without ta'til, without this sort of ta'til. And ta'til means there's another tendency which I just said, that where you can't talk about God at all because talking about him would be talking about him in our language according to our imagination. So the Quranic solution to this is to practice tanzih in a summary fashion, but then talk about God according to the knowledge he has given us. Talk about not his self, not his substance, but about his characteristics, and those characteristics through which we gain knowledge of God. And through that knowledge we relate to the God. Because if we get into the trap of ta'til, then we have basically not a living God, but sort of a na'uzubillah, dead God with which we don't have we can't relate to that God. We can't love him because he's beyond our imagination. So the Quranic solution is to do both tanzih. So tanzih, that is, say that God is unlike anything else, but this should be only in general, not in detail. Don't get. So we said he's unlike anything, and then when you go and positively describe him through his sifat as revealed in the Quran and the Sunnah, and that will avoid getting into what we call ta'til, or one form of this ta'til in modern philosophy is deism. So what we want to avoid through combining tanzih and avoidance of ta'til is both anthropomorphism and any other morphisms, but also ta'til, making God into a na'uzubillah, dead God. So what we want is a living God. And when we describe his characteristic, we are going to understand them according to our human understanding and language. So to avoid this is not to not believe in those characteristics, but start with tanzih in a general fashion, that there's nothing like him, and then see. So he's a merciful, but his mercy has no similarity with the mercy of anything else. It's beyond any other mercy we have seen or we have thought of. But he is merciful. We can't say we deny God mercy, because that will involve us into tashbih. So what I was getting into by this example is to say the Quranic injunction, and this the consensus of Islamic madhahib or ideologies is that you need to practice tanzih in general fashion, not in detail, in a summary fashion, and you have to avoid ta'til by giving God all his characteristics in a detailed manner. That's why Quran describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his characteristics in detail, and it is through his characteristics that we know him and we relate to him. But we avoid tashbih in those by starting with tanzih. That is generally saying that what we are saying is, although we are using human language and human understanding, which is unavoidable or which is inevitable, but we start with general denial that there's no similarity. Like, for example, we start with la ilaha, general rejection of the gods, and then we go on to positively assert that there is one God, etc. So what I was saying is that when there's more than one legitimate possible meaning, often the purpose is that often people have differences because some of them are emphasizing one aspect and the others are emphasizing other aspects. And sometimes they might see each other as at odds, but they are actually not at odds. So those who God give them inclinations towards tanzih, without denying, without getting into ta'til, they might emphasize tanzih over tashbih, over the positive, or over the avoidance of ta'til. On the other hand, those God gives natural or cultural or social inclination towards the avoidance of ta'til, they might exaggerate anti-ta'til interpretation, sometime at the expense of tanzih, or what might seem like at the expense of tanzih. So more than not, what we see as the difference of interpretation and see as different ideologies, they are emphasizing different Islamic ideologies. They are emphasizing two different aspects which are both needed, which are both essential, and by emphasizing, and oftentimes they might, debate with each other, and in debate as it happens, people's interpretation get even more extreme, and you might think that those who are emphasizing tanzih, they might be mu'tazila. They're getting into ta'til, or those who are trying to avoid ta'til, they might be neglecting tanzih, and sometimes it actually happens. So that's why we have these two different ideologies to keep most of the people in the middle. So these are basically the limits which they sort of, men or women, these two different ideologies. So interpretation is blessing in this sense. I didn't mean to go on that long on this point, but anyway, this was an important point. So I'll pick up from here then. And